This video is your introduction to the world of numerical reasoning tests. In the video, I'm going to give a brief overview of the test, some helpful tips for taking a test, and how to prepare for one. We'll see what a typical numerical reasoning question looks like, and how you might approach answering one. We won't be going into details of individual math skills or lots of example questions. However, you can look at some of the other videos in which we will do just that. So, we'll start at the very beginning with what is numerical reasoning? Well, here's one official definition. The numerical reasoning test enables the objective assessment of the candidate's ability to reason and understand information in numerical format. So the key point here is this bit, that it involves numerical information. So this is information that's in the form of numbers that can be written in lots of different ways, including fractions, decimals, rates per 10,000, measurements in all sorts of units, or it's information which is about numbers, for example a percentage change, a fraction of an amount, and these require understanding and also require you to use this information to reason, make decisions, and calculate values based on that numerical information to find something we don't know. The next part of the definition gives a little bit of an indication of what this actually looks like in practice when this is being tested, but we'll be going into a lot more detail about that later in this video. So what is required to be able to do numerical reasoning? Well, it's not just a test of math skills and procedures, but that is part of it. You need to be able to understand and use lots of mathematical skills. Before you can even apply these, though, you need to do two important things which are both a huge part of numerical reasoning. First, you need to be able to extract the numbers you need, which means being able to read and understand a wide variety of tables and text, seeing numbers in different formats, units, and accuracies. There is also a big element of problem solving, working out what it is you need to find, what information you'll need to find this, and what path you'll take to get there. Finally, there is also an element of time management, getting this process down to a manageable time for each question. Now, this is actually one of the most overlooked and important elements of a numerical reasoning test, so we'll be talking about this in a lot more detail later. So, why numerical reasoning? Why do we do it? Who is interested? Well, most people come across a numerical reasoning test as part of a job application, often along with other aptitude tests like verbal reasoning and abstract reasoning tests. This is largely because the skill set is useful in all sorts of different professions and fields. But it's worth noting that this is about more than just candidates being good at maths. Most of the maths procedures you'll actually do in a numerical reasoning test are things that could be easily done by a computer in milliseconds. What the numerical test is actually about showing is that you can problem solve, finding appropriate data needed, thinking accurately about how to get from what you know to what you need to find, and being able to do this fast and accurately. So, let's jump straight in and have a look at what a typical numerical reasoning question looks like and break it down. We're not going to answer this question, we're just going to have a bit of a look at what's there. Now, each numerical reasoning question consists of three main elements. The first of these is the question text here. So this actually asks the question, tells us what we're trying to find. So it's pretty essential. It's also likely to contain information that you need to find the answer. This might be some figures, or it might explain how other figures have changed. Or it might just be other information which we need to use as the second element to find what the numbers are we need to use. Now this second element is the table. And that will normally contain a whole load of data, some of which might be relevant to the question, and a lot of which is likely to be irrelevant. So using the question text and what we're told there, we need to identify what information we need from the table and what we need to do with this information. The final element which appears in every question is the answer choices. Now there are 5 of these, and only one of them is going to be the correct answer to the question. The others will often be designed to try and trip you up. They might be answers that you would get from making common mistakes in this sort of question, or they might be things that just sound plausible as an answer. The answer choices are an essential part of the question, and they shouldn't just be ignored until the end when you've already got your answer. They're as important as the other 2 elements, and if you consider them from the very beginning, they will help you to save a lot of time and answer the question accurately. So that's what an individual question looks like. What about the overall test? So when you take a numerical reasoning test, you'll do it on a computer. The questions will be displayed on the screen, and you will select all your answers on the computer. You're not allowed to bring anything in that will help you, but you do get provided with some things. You're given a calculator, 2 sheets of erasable paper, and some erasable markers with which to write on that erasable paper. Now you should use these, and remember you have them to help you with the questions. Particularly the paper and markers, you'll often find it's easy to write down your answers to the intermediate calculations you've done, the bits of data you know you're going to need later. And this will help you to be much faster at answering the question. And the calculator is also very important to use if necessary. Don't forget that you have it, but also don't overuse it. Sometimes it might actually slow you down, so do check if you can do the calculation easier mentally first. So when you sit this test, you're going to be presented with normally 10 or 20 multiple choice questions like the example we just saw. You will have about the same number of minutes as the number of questions, so that's 1 minute to answer each question on average. So as previously mentioned, you'll need to move very fast. The same number of marks are normally available for each question, and you don't get marks taken off if you get answers wrong. So it's important to try and answer every single question on the test, even if it comes down to guessing the answers to some of these. Now normally the pass mark is 50%, but you should be aiming for about 80% regularly if you're going to be confident of passing. Right, we're going to now take a look at how to answer a question in a bit more detail. We're not going to actually answer one, but we're going to talk about some of the method behind doing so. We're going to look in detail first at 2 key points. So the first of these is about irrelevant information, which was mentioned briefly earlier. So here's a different example question with the same 3 elements again: question text, table, and answer choices. You'll see that this table contains a huge amount of information here, a lot of which we're not going to use. So it's the question text that's going to help us actually find out what elements of this table are going to be useful to us. So reading that through, based on the data in the table, what would be the predicted turnover in pounds of a retailer who sold 10,000 CDs and 5,000 vinyls in 2015? So there's our key important information. Our retailers sold 10,000 CDs, 5,000 vinyls, and we're looking at the year 2015. So straight away you might notice that this table contains lots of different years. We have 1990, 95, 2000, 2005, 2010, 2015. But according to the question text, the only year we're interested in really is 2015. So we can immediately exclude all of this information here. Looking again at the question text, all we're told about this retailer is that they sold 10,000 CDs, 5,000 vinyls. So despite having all these formats in our table here, we don't actually need to know about any of them except for vinyls and CDs. So we can also cut out all of these rows here. Now that just leaves us with 4 potential numbers which might be useful to help us answer this question. It actually turns out that we would need to use both the units sold figures and the turnover to help answer this question. So that's our relevant information from the table. In total, therefore, all of this red area there is excluded completely irrelevant information, with just these 4 figures being the things that are actually going to help us. Now, hopefully you can see that this process is going to be immensely important when answering numerical reasoning questions. If we hadn't done this, we would be being distracted by all this irrelevant information, potentially being led on wild goose chases, or potentially wasting a lot of time trying to figure out what to do. So this is essential to be able to answer the questions in that fast-paced environment, being able to quickly identify what the data is that's relevant to you. So we keep talking a lot about the timing, and it is a very key element of the test. And the main kind of thing to realize is that the questions in the test actually often wouldn't be that difficult if you were given enough time to properly process them. The trick is, of course, managing to figure out the correct answer in an average of only about 1 minute per question. Luckily, there are a few tricks you can use to speed this up. The first is, wherever possible, do some estimation and make sensible kind of assumptions about the answers. By looking at the answer choices, you may be able to see the correct answer or one that you think is very likely already. And this leads us into the next point, which is again to use the answer choices. Some of these might be obviously wrong from the sensible looking you've done and the estimation, so you can exclude these straight away. You also might remember that some of the answer choices are likely to be red herrings, traps that they want you to fall into. So if you can identify these traps straight away, you can possibly eliminate those as potential answers too. Another technique, although it might sound surprising given that you are trying to save time, is that it's often worth stopping and thinking before you dive in with the first method you think of to answer the question. Sometimes there are quicker ways to work out the answer, and sometimes there are shortcuts which can point you in the right direction. So there's good examples of how to do this estimation and looking for shortcuts process in one of the other videos, which you can find and watch if you want. Now finally, because there is no penalty for the wrong answers, if you are really stuck and you're running out of time, you need to do the other questions, or you need to finish the test, of course you can just guess the answer. And this is especially useful if you've done these earlier steps and you've narrowed the answers down to maybe just 1 or 2 options, one of which you think is particularly likely. This is going to vastly improve your chances of getting the correct answer when you do have to guess. So now we've seen a bit more about the questions and the test, we can put together a process which you can follow when you're answering any question in a numerical reasoning test. The aim of this is to try and make this process automatic through practice. And if you can do this, then you will in the long run save yourself time when you actually sit a numerical reasoning test. So when you first see a question, the best thing you can do is read the question very carefully and identify what is actually being asked. And this is really important. If you don't identify what is being asked properly, you may find yourself wasting a lot of time doing completely irrelevant things. And of course, once you know what you need to find, it's time to start that process of identifying the relevant and irrelevant data. Obviously, a lot of this is going to be in the table, but you should also try and work out from the question text what the most useful things are in that text. Once you've done this, the next part is to identify how you're going to be working towards the answer. And there are really 2 parts to this. The first is just identifying what calculations would be needed to find the answer. And the second is considering whether you would need to find this in full accuracy, whether there's a faster method or a slightly less accurate one which will be easier but will be good enough to get the answer. And to do this, you'll need to be actively looking at those answer choices and considering how they relate to each other. Are they close or far apart? The context of the question, are they sensible sounding answers in terms of what you know? And if having done this, we determine that we can use estimation to try and find the answer, we can use this to get a close answer. Even if we can't find exactly what the answer is from this point, we may be able to exclude some answers which are impossible. And at this point, we might have the answer, or we might need to go on and do some accurate calculations, using our calculator if necessary, but using mental calculations if that's going to be faster. Now, hopefully at the end of your calculations, you'll get a number, and you'll need to check that this does in fact give you an answer, that it tells you which answer choice you need to choose, and also that this answer choice is reasonable. And the earlier thinking is what's going to help you out with this. Assuming all is well, you then choose your answer and move on. And obviously, if you didn't quite get it down to one single answer, it is still important to select an answer for the question, particularly if you've narrowed it down to just a couple of options. So we've talked a lot about the structure of the test, the structure of the questions, some of the skills. We haven't gone into any detail about the mathematics skills that are needed. And this is because there's actually another of other videos in which we talk in much more detail about some of these individual skills. To give you an idea though, here's a selection of some of the topics which you'll need to have a grasp on in order to score well on the test. As you can see, these range from some very simple things. Applying arithmetic, that's the 4 major operations, adding, subtracting, multiplying, dividing, through some slightly harder things such as calculating percentage changes, right up to some really quite tricky topics to get to grips with, for example, calculating compound interest. To see more information about what these topics are, see the techniques which are used in relation to these, and maybe practice on some example questions, I do recommend watching these other videos, which are titled after some of these topics. Some things, though, you can set your mind to rest about straight away. The test isn't going to be asking you about outside information. You're not going to need business jargon, scientific or economic knowledge, and you won't need to remember lots of figures and facts to pull out during the test. The idea is not to test your memory. Everything important you need to answer a question will appear in that question. You're also not going to need to use verbal reasoning or language comprehension. Beyond being able to pull out the information that is given to you in that short question text, there won't be long passages you need to interpret and draw conclusions for. This is all in a different type of aptitude test, namely the verbal reasoning test. And the math skills you need, they're all numerical ones. There's no need to revise some of the other classical mathematics topics, such as laws of geometry or trigonometry. There also won't be any formal algebra problems. Although some of the thinking could be considered algebraic in nature, you're not going to be asked to factorize a quadratic, simplify an expression, or graph a function, or anything like that. So a big question that a lot of people have about the test is, how much preparation do you need to do? Unfortunately, this is one that's very hard to answer, as it really depends on you. A very great deal depends on how confident and experienced you are with your mathematics skills. Obviously, the more work you need to do on these, the more preparation you're going to have to do for the test. Even if you are very confident in your mathematics, though, you should make sure that you are familiar with the particular format of the questions and the time pressure of the test. If you've done the test before, then you should already have some familiarity with this, and possibly some ideas of what you need to work on. So you may find this a little easier to answer this question. Of course, the follow-up to this question is, what should you be doing in your preparation time? This is again somewhat personal, but there are definitely common things which would be recommended for almost everybody. So the first important thing to do is to brush up on your mathematics skills. Beginning with the most basic skills rather than jumping in was the most difficult. For some, this might be just a bit of revision, but there may also be some skills you find you need to learn fresh for the first time. A good place to start is, of course, the videos on the different topics, which explain a bit about both the concepts behind the skills and the methods. Through doing this, you should also be able to identify, if you don't already know, what it is you find most tricky. These are the areas where you should be dedicating most of your practice, as this is where you can make the biggest gains. Practicing skills which you are already proficient and confident in, while it's satisfying and easy, isn't going to do as much. You're likely going to get the questions based on those skills right already, while the topics you're neglecting will likely trip you up. Now, obviously, in order to get yourself ready for answering the numerical reasoning style questions, you will want to practice with questions in this format. This will also help in that process of identifying what you are struggling with, and then you can go back and revise those skills further before trying more questions. But it's not just enough to practice the questions. At some point, you will also need to prepare yourself by putting yourself in the same conditions you will be in the test. And this includes having those very strict time limits. That way, when you do come to take the test, you'll be far more ready to work in an effective way. And hopefully you will also be feeling a bit more relaxed and confident as you know exactly what to expect. So I hope this video has been useful to you in starting your preparations for the numerical reasoning test. Don't forget to look at some of the other videos to work on some of those math skills. And I wish you the best of luck with the test when you come to do it.